The temperature in the ledger hall of Vastarath had held at exactly 11 degrees for 6,200 years, and Felon had never once thought to find that strange. He found it strange now. He was in the archive balcony, third row, the spot reserved for record witnesses, a position he had never occupied in 31 years of service, because record witnesses were called only when a session was expected to produce something worth contesting later. Below him, 903 delegates filled the hall's tiered benches. He had checked the attendance log twice. The number was correct. He had never seen more than 200 at a standard tribute session. 14 observer species that held no voting status had filed speaker requests simultaneously that morning, a thing that, according to his own archive records, had never happened in the conclave's history. Down on the floor, on the platform built 4 steps lower than every Doranic seat, Delegate Marin Soli stood with a cloth napkin tucked under her left forearm. Felon had been counting her folds. He did not know when he had started. He was at 214. She was not looking at Overseer-designate Vral Osek. She was looking at the walls, at the laminated tribute documents pressed into the resin, 6,000 years of extracted compliance, every clause visible if you pressed your face close enough. Felon had worked 3 meters from those walls for 3 decades. He had never pressed his face close enough. Then she spoke. "You can recall the ships," she said. Her voice was the same voice she used to confirm a filing receipt. "The signal is already out. No counterfiling, no motion to adjourn, no sound from the Doranic gallery at all." Felon's left forearm, under its cloth wrapping, began to write. He pressed it flat against his thigh. He did not look down. He already knew what the number was. He had been calculating it for 9 days, in pieces, in the quiet of the deep stacks, and he had not let himself finish until now, because finishing it meant understanding what he was part of. Across the chamber floor, 3 Doranic junior assessors rose from their seats. They did not look at Osek. They did not look at each other. One by one, in the formal posture of procedural withdrawal, they stated their recusal from the session and requested reclassification as observers. The first public fracture in Doranic solidarity in 310 years. And it was so quiet that the delegates in the back rows probably thought it was a bathroom break. The session could not be closed. The counterledger had been formally entered into record. Osek stood at his platform, 2.9 meters of copper-gray chitin and 419 years of unbroken institutional authority. And for the first time in any log Felon had ever read, he had nothing to file. The part that still keeps me up at night isn't the math, it's what she was counting. Stay close. 14 years before Felon counted the 214th fold, he was 2 levels below the conclave floor, in the deep stacks, filing an amendment to Conclave Procedural Charter Section 2. It was his 4,847th amendment filing of that calendar cycle. He stamped it. He shelved it. The amendment had come from the Doranic assessor caste, which submitted most amendments, and it revised the co-signature requirement for archive submissions. Any external filing would now need Doranic administrative approval before it could enter formal conclave record. He had not read it. 3 aisles away, behind a sealed door that required supervisor-level clearance, a project he did not know existed had been running for 300 years. The ledger hall of Vastarath was built so that you understood what you were before anyone spoke a word. Marin Solis understood this. Felon watched her understand it the first time she walked in 11 minutes early, which he noted because delegates arrived early only when they were nervous or when they were counting something. She did not look nervous. She stood at the entrance for a full minute and simply watched the room breathe before it filled. She counted the columns. 31. She checked the temperature display on the north wall. 11 degrees Celsius, a Doranic physiological preference that had never been adjusted for a guest species in 6,200 years of operation. She looked at the platform where the human delegation would sit, then at the nearest Doranic seat, and her lips moved slightly, like someone doing arithmetic. 4 steps, each step exactly 22 centimeters higher than Galactic standard specification. She tucked the napkin under her left forearm the way her grandmother had pressed flowers, not to preserve them, but to carry evidence that something living had been there. Felin was in the hall because the human delegation had requested him specifically. Not his division, not the Tuvhari Archive Service in general. Him, by name, with his employee registration number included in the request, which was unusual enough that his supervisor had called him in to read it aloud rather than forwarding it through standard channels. His supervisor's expression had been difficult to read. This was unusual. Tuvhari expressions were generally legible to most species who spent time around them. The bioluminescent text that assembled on their skin in moments of strong feeling tended to give things away whether they wanted it to or not. His supervisor's left arm had shown old Tuvhari script during the meeting, the formal kind that Felin had only ever seen in documents dated before his own birth. He had not asked what it said. He was beginning to understand that there had been quite a few moments, across quite a few years, when he should have asked more questions than he did. He had also noticed, processing the human delegation standard intake filing 14 days prior, that it included an attachment classified as supplementary cultural document. He had stamped it and routed it to the conclave's Diversity and Relations Office without opening it. Standard procedure. He followed standard procedure reliably. He had been following it for 31 years. He was sitting in the record witness seat now, watching Marin Solis watch the room, and he was thinking about that unopened attachment with the specific discomfort of someone who suspects they missed something that was sitting in plain sight. Overseer-designate Vral Asek entered from the north corridor. His jaw clicks arrived before he did, audible at 4 meters, a dry mechanical sound like calculations being run against hard edges. He walked with deliberate weight, each step on the obsidian floor producing exactly the volume he intended it to produce. Felin had logged Asek sessions for 31 years without ever attending one in person. In the archive records, Asek was a pattern of outcomes. In the room, he was the sound of certainty that had never once been wrong. The Doranic gallery clicked when he took his place, 31 assessors, the sound rolling across the chamber in a single 4-second wave like one mechanism engaging. Then silence. Asek began the tribute recitation. He was precise. Every subsection, every interest calculation, every clause of the 22-cycle payment window, every paragraph of the protectorate absorption alternative, which ran to 9 subclauses and 2 annexes. Humanities assessed liability, 0.9 quadrillion credits, derived from resource potential assessments, projected trade yield across 4 centuries, and a legacy debt assigned at first contact 14 years prior, on the grounds that any species making contact with the conclave inherited the outstanding obligations of any predecessor species that had occupied their territory. Earth's predecessor species had been catalogued as pre-contact fauna. No one had flagged this in 14 years. Felin flagged it now in the archive of his own memory for the first time. He noted that normal and correct were not always the same thing. He noted that he had spent 31 years in an institution built very deliberately on that gap. Marin listened through every word without moving, not a shift of weight, not a visible breath change. The napkin stayed tucked under her forearm. When Asek finished, she said, "Thank you. We will submit our formal response within 3 standard days." She stood, she walked to the exit corridor. She did not bow. The Doranic gallery did not click. 31 assessors sat in complete acoustic stillness, and Felin, watching from the balcony, felt the bioluminescent text assembling on his left forearm before he could stop it. He looked down. It said 14. He did not know what it meant yet. He covered it with his sleeve and went back to the deep stacks. The response arrived exactly 72 hours later. At the precise second, the conclave's intake window opened for the morning cycle. Felin was the duty archivist. He processed it. 1 page, cotton fiber paper, not standard filing material, heavier with a slight texture that his fingertips noticed before his eyes finished reading the heading. He turned it over. No annexes, no counterproposals, no attached legal framework, no list of demands. Humanity declined to pay the 0.9 quadrillion. Humanity declined protectorate status. Humanity declined to negotiate any terms at all. The final paragraph was 3 sentences. It requested formally and without hostility, that the conclave of reckoning and all affiliated enforcement bodies refrain from approaching, contacting, or conducting any assessments within the sovereign space of Earth and its associated territories. It cited no legal basis. It required no response. Do not approach Earth again. Felon set the page down. He picked it up. He read it twice more slowly, which he had not done with a document since his first year in the stacks when everything still felt like it might matter. He went to his heating unit and made tea. His hands were steady. He found this more alarming than shaking would have been. The steadiness felt like something he was choosing, rather than something that simply was. He had been afraid before, across 31 years of sessions that ended badly for the species sitting on the lowered platform. He had always been steady. The difference now was that the steadiness felt like a decision, and he wasn't sure who had made it. He drank the tea. He filed the response under standard intake protocol. He flagged it for supervisor review. Then he opened the human delegation's supplementary cultural document for the first time. It was a sourdough bread recipe, handwritten 6 pages. The instructions were detailed in a way that assumed the reader had never made bread before and might be working without proper equipment. How to test whether the starter was active. How to tell by sound whether the dough had risen enough. What the crust should feel like against your knuckle when you knocked on it. At the bottom of the last page, in different ink and slightly different handwriting, someone had added a single line. This takes time, that's the point. Felon stared at it for a long time. His left arm, without his willing it, wrote something across his skin. He looked down. It said, "Read the attachment." He filed the recipe under Cultural Documents, Human, subsection, Food Traditions. He closed the folder. He sat for a moment in the particular quiet of someone who has just realized they are several years behind on a conversation they didn't know they were having. 31 Doranic enforcement vessels were dispatched to Earth's coordinates within 6 hours of OSEC receiving humanity's response. Standard procedure. The conclave had no prior instance of a full refusal in its recorded history, but the enforcement protocol existed, and OSEC followed it without modification. The vessels carried interdiction arrays capable of bringing a non-compliant planet's communication infrastructure to zero within 4 hours. They were also capable of targeted orbital strike, though this was listed in the protocol as a measure of last resort, defined as, when all other compliance tools have been exhausted without result. They arrived at Earth. They found no defense fleet, no weapons platforms, no military response of any kind. What they found was a radio signal broadcasting on every available frequency, a single audio file, transmitted on infinite loop from every major population center on the planet simultaneously. Felon pulled the signal log from the conclave's monitoring records 2 days later and listened to it once, late at night, in the deep stacks with the ambient systems turned low. It was heartbeats, 8.1 billion of them, recorded individually and layered into a single continuous sound. Not synchronized, each one its own rhythm, its own pace, the way real hearts beat when they are simply alive and not performing anything. Thump, 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 thump. No words, no demands, no threats. Just the sound of every human being on Earth sent out into the dark on all frequencies, waiting. The enforcement fleet held position for 4 days. They could not fire on a sound. They could not leave without the maneuver being logged as a retreat. The fleet commander sent 6 queries to OSEC requesting clarification on engagement parameters. OSEC sent back the standard protocol 6 times. On the 5th day, the commander filed a supplementary incident report with the phrase, "No actionable target identified," and the vessels continued to hold. They were still holding when Felon found his supervisor's signature. He found it because the Tuvhari Archive Service sent an all-division notification flagging a large external filing that had been logged to the public conclave record that morning. Felon processed these notifications routinely. External filings came in monthly, mostly commercial, occasionally political. He opened this one because the file size was unusual. Most external filings ran between 200 and 4,000 pages. This one was 2.3 million. He opened the source record. The filing had originated from within the Tuvhari Archive Service's own deep stacks, from the sealed section 3 aisles away from his desk, the one that required supervisor-level clearance to access. The authorization signature at the top of the source document was his supervisor's, dated 31 years ago. The filing had been prepared in stages across 3 decades, completed, and then held timestamp locked, waiting for a trigger condition specified in the internal header. Felon read the header. Release condition. First instance of a species filing a formal noncompliance response to a conclave tribute demand and departing the session without entering a counteroffer in any session logged by the archive witness record. He was the archive witness. He had been in the balcony. When Marin walked out without bowing and without a counteroffer, his presence in that specific seat had triggered the release. He had been chosen by name. He had been the trigger. The filing had been public for 9 hours before he found it. He sat very still at his desk for a moment that felt longer than it was. His left arm had been writing continuously since he opened the source record, columns of figures assembling across his skin faster than he could read them, cross-referenced yield data, suppressed resource valuations, exchange rate adjustments running across 300 years, a total that kept climbing each time a new column completed. He unwrapped the cloth and watched it write. The number it kept returning to was 61.4 quadrillion, not owed by the coalition species, owed to them by the Doranic assessor caste, in manipulated exchange rates, in suppressed resource valuations, in unreturned collateral, in administrative fees that had never been audited because no audit had ever been filed. Felon had cataloged the sessions. Felon had filed the amendments. Felon had stamped the documents that made all of it procedurally correct. He had never, in 31 years, run the numbers from the other direction. Someone had. Someone had been running them for 300 years, 3 aisles away, and had been waiting for the right question to be filed before releasing the answer. He got up. He walked the 3 aisles. He pressed his face against the resin wall and read the first tribute document he had ever actually read, a compliance order from 6,200 years ago, the founding debt the whole structure had been built on. The resin was cold against his forehead. The document inside it was smaller than he expected. The handwriting of whoever had signed it 6,200 years ago was cramped and careful, the writing of someone who understood that what they were putting down would last. He stayed there for a while. The Oracy stopped work the same morning. The archive filing went public. No announcement, no list of demands, no designated spokespeople. The Oracy had no individual leaders. Decisions moved by shift vote across 3.4 billion workers spread across every mining platform and extraction rig and ore processing facility in the coalition's operational range. The shift vote had been running in quiet relay for 14 years, passed from platform to platform, from crew to crew, re-asked and re-answered each cycle. The question was simple: when it is time, will you stop? 3.4 billion workers had answered yes, each one individually, across 14 years of relay. So they stopped, all of them, all at once across every facility simultaneously, with no coordination signal that conclave monitoring could detect, because the coordination had already happened years ago, one vote at a time. Felon pulled the yield records when the silence started showing in the data. He was looking for something localized at first, a systems failure, a transit disruption, a single facility that had gone dark and taken nearby operations with it. What he found instead was every column zeroed, every number he expected to see, simply absent. He had processed yield records for 31 years. He had never seen data that looked like a held breath before. 3 days after the Oracy stopped, the Veil ship surfaced. The Conclave's records listed the Veil as politically non-operational, a small, pale, near-silent species that communicated primarily through precise hand signs, had once been the galaxy's most respected shipwrights, and had been pushed out of their own construction yards 180 years ago by a sequence of Doranic trade clauses. Felon had processed those clauses. He had filed them without reading them. The Veil were listed in every assessment he had ever logged as no current fleet capacity, no territorial holdings, no political representation. They had been assessed, in short, as finished. 89 vessels emerged from an asteroid belt in a non-monitored system. They had been built before the Conclave's ship registration requirement existed, which meant the Conclave had no record of them. They appeared in no database, no fleet registry, no monitoring log. They had been sitting in that belt in the dark for 180 years. Humanity accepted 31 of them. The intake form the human delegation filed listed the accepted vessels under a single category: cultural distribution infrastructure. Phelan stared at those 3 words. He could not work out what 31 decommissioned warships had to do with cultural distribution. He filed an internal query to the human delegation's liaison office asking for clarification. The response came back in 4 minutes. Details will be provided at the emergency session. He filed the response. He noted it in his log. He wrapped his forearm again. It had soaked through 2 cloths by now, and went to make a 3rd cup of tea that he did not particularly want. 6 more species filed formal secession notices across the following 36 hours. By the 3rd notice, Phelan had stopped being surprised by each one individually and had started being surprised only by the shape of it, the way each filing slotted into place as if it had been prepared and waiting, which he was beginning to understand it had. By the 5th notice, the running total on his arm had stopped climbing and settled on a number that did not change no matter how many times he checked it. 90 days. That was the timeline the original Conclave Charter specified. Article 1, Section 1, the founding document that the Duranic Amendment had modified but not replaced, because the amendment had only changed Section 2. Section 1 remained exactly as it had been written 6,200 years ago. Under Section 1, any formally entered challenge to a tribute assessment required resolution by independent audit within 90 days. The amendment had been designed to prevent challenges from reaching formal entry. The co-signature requirement had blocked every attempt for 310 years. But Marin had not filed under the amended charter. She had filed under the original, under the version that had never been repealed because no one had ever tried to use it. In 6,200 years, the Conclave of Reckoning had never been asked to produce its own ledger. The question had simply never been filed. Phelan sat with this in the quiet of the deep stacks, the hum of the climate systems the only sound, the archive cold and still around him the way it had been every night of his working life. He had loved this quiet. He had found it reliable. He thought now about what reliability actually meant, whether the thing that stays the same year after year is stable because it is sound, or because no one has yet applied the right pressure in the right place. He thought about a woman pressing rosemary into linen in a kitchen he had never seen. He thought about a sourdough starter kept alive for 40 years. He thought about a sealed door 3 aisles from his desk, and a project that had been running for 300 years inside it, patient and quiet, waiting for someone to ask the question it had been built to answer. The emergency session was scheduled for day 14. He had 8 days to decide what kind of witness he intended to be. 8 days passed the way waiting always passes, slowly at first, then all at once. Phelan spent them in the deep stacks, reading, not filing, reading. He pulled every session record that mentioned the coalition species, the Oracy, the Vale, the Havari. 4 others he had processed as names on forms for 3 decades without ever treating them as anything more than that. He read their tribute assessments. He read the administrative fee schedules applied to their resource yields. He read the exchange rate adjustments the Duranic caste had filed, quietly, in small increments, over 310 years. Never large enough in any single filing to trigger an audit flag, always just within the threshold his own division used to determine whether a change required escalation. He had set that threshold. 12 years ago, during a routine procedural review, he had recommended it be raised slightly to reduce processing load. The caste had filed 14 exchange rate adjustments in the 2 months following his recommendation. All 14 had cleared under the new threshold. He did not sleep well for the remaining 8 days. On the morning of day 14, Phelan arrived at the ledger hall 2 hours before the session opened. He was not the first one there. Marin was in the corridor outside subchamber 14, the supply closet the human delegation used as their waiting room. She was standing with her back to the wall, the rosemary napkin in her hands, folding and unfolding it with the practiced ease of something done so many times that the hands no longer needed instruction. Phelan had a clear view of her through the corridor's small service window. He stopped walking. He did not announce himself. He counted 4 folds before he caught himself doing it and looked away. The corridor smelled faintly of something he could not immediately place. Warm, organic. He identified it after a moment. Bread, recently baked, coming from under the door of subchamber 14. The human delegation had been in there since before dawn, apparently, doing what they did before hard days. He went to the archive balcony. He took his seat. He wrapped his left forearm in fresh cloth. By the time the session opened, the hall had filled to a count he had never seen. 903 delegates. The last time attendance had exceeded 600 was the Belvari session, 88 years ago, the one that Osek still held the record for. Phelan noted the attendance figure in his log, and then noted below it that he was not sure the log would matter by the end of the day in the way it had mattered yesterday. Osek entered. His jaw clicks were audible from the corridor 30 seconds before he appeared, faster than Phelan had heard them run in any prior session log. He had not slept. This was visible in the way his chitin sat across his neck ridge, slightly darker than usual at the stress points. The copper gray deepened toward near black along the seams. He had been calculating for 8 days without a resolution, which for a Doranic assessor was not merely a professional problem. It was a structural one. Osek's entire framework for processing an opponent depended on identifying what they wanted. A species that wanted nothing, that declined everything politely and asked only to be left alone, had no place in his decision tree. He had been trying to find the place for 8 days. He had not found it. The session opened with Osek filing a procedural objection. The coalition's archive submission, he stated, lacked the required Doranic co-signature under Conclave Procedural Charter Section 2, Amendment 7, filed 310 years ago. The submission was therefore inadmissible as formal record and could not be entered into the session as evidence. He presented the citation cleanly, with the confidence of a man who had used this particular procedural tool 17 times in the last century and had never once seen it fail. Marin waited until he finished. The submission was filed under Article 1, Section 1 of the original Conclave Charter, she said. The amendment you are citing applies to Section 2. Section 1 has not been amended. It has never been amended. The co-signature requirement does not exist under the version of the Charter we filed under. Osek's jaw clicks accelerated. Section 1 filings were superseded by the amendment framework established in. The amendment framework modified Section 2, Marin said. Section 1 was left intact. We have the original charter text in the filing, page 1, line 1. The procedural officer, a Westvolley, the first non-Doranic officer to hold the chair in 88 years, looked at the citation, looked at the filing, looked at the original charter text on page 1, line 1. The objection is noted, the officer said. The submission stands. Osek went still for exactly 2 seconds. Phelan counted them. Then the jaw clicks resumed faster. Marin presented the counterledger in full. She did not present it as an accusation. She presented it the way a labor arbitration lawyer presents a discrepancy in a pay record, factually, clearly, without theater. The Tuvhari archive, now public across 12,000 worlds for 9 days, had been formally entered into Conclave record. She walked through the top-line figures first. 18 species currently under tribute obligation to the Conclave. Combined unpaid debt owed to those species by the Doranic assessor caste. 61.4 quadrillion credits in suppressed resource valuations, manipulated exchange rates, and unreturned collateral accumulated across 310 years. Humanity's assessed liability to the Conclave, 0.9 quadrillion. The math has always been available, she said. No one ran it from the other direction. The Doranic gallery did not click. Phelan noted this. The gallery had clicked at the opening, the standard 4-second rhythm. It had not clicked since Marin began speaking, 31 assessors sitting in the particular stillness of people who are doing rapid calculations and not liking the results. The chamber had 903 delegates in it, and it was nearly silent. Felon could hear the temperature system running in the walls, the faint mechanical breath of the system that had kept the room at 11 degrees for 6,200 years, unchanged, unquestioned, set for one species' comfort, and never adjusted for anyone else's. An aide brought water to the floor platform. Marin took a sip. She set the cup down. She adjusted the napkin under her left forearm with the same small gesture Felon had watched her make in every session, the same unhurried, private motion, as though she were simply making sure she had not forgotten something. Nothing in her body signaled what was coming next. 9 species submitted formal coalition filings in the 36 hours following our response, Marin said. You have their secession notices in the record. What you do not yet have is the detail of what those species contributed to make this filing possible. She paused. The Tuvhari Archive Service spent 300 years building the record you are looking at. 300 years of careful, patient work, conducted inside this institution, by people the conclave classified as record furniture. The RSC coordinated 3.4 billion individual votes across 14 years, using labor relay networks that your monitoring systems considered too boring to surveil. The Veil offered 89 ships that your assessors recorded as non-existent because they were built before you required registration. She looked at Osek. You prepared for every outcome, except the one where we didn't want anything. Osek's jaw clicks had been running at a steady elevated pace since the session opened. At this line, they stopped. Not slowed, stopped. The silence where the clicks had been was louder than the clicks. Felon felt it land across 903 delegates like a change in air pressure. Dasren rose. She was small, the Havari were all small, warm-bodied, in near-constant motion even when still, their fast metabolisms visible in the slight tremor of their hands that was not nervousness, but simply the cost of being alive at that speed. She had not spoken in any session Felon had ever logged. The Havari had no written records. Everything they knew, they carried in memory, passed from speaker to speaker across generations in unbroken oral chain. The Doranic assessor caste had spent 310 years ruling their testimony, inadmissible on the grounds that oral evidence was unverified. Dasren asked for the floor. Osek objected. The West Valley chair granted it anyway. She began to speak. She recited 14 generations of Oracy yield records from memory, every harvest cycle, every percentage extracted, every administrative fee assessed and collected without audit. Her voice was steady and unhurried, the voice of someone reciting something they have carried for so long it has become part of their breathing. She did not look at notes. She did not pause to remember. The numbers came out of her in sequence, one after another, the way water comes out of a source that has been running underground for a very long time before it finally finds the surface. The recitation took 41 minutes. Felon logged every word. His hand moved across the record tablet without stopping. He was aware, distantly, that his left arm had soaked through the cloth wrapping again, but he did not stop to replace it. At minute 23, Osek's jaw clicks stopped. He did not start them again. 903 delegates sat in a chamber built to make people understand what they were. And for 18 minutes after the clicks stopped, the only sound was Dasren's voice and the faint breath of the temperature system in the walls. This was the moment Felon had 8 days to prepare for, and he had not prepared for it correctly. He had prepared to be a witness. A careful one, neutral, accurate, the kind of archivist his 31 years had trained him to be. He had prepared to log what happened and file it correctly and let the record speak for itself, because that was what records were for. What he had not prepared for was the feeling of watching 300 years of patient work arrive at the surface all at once. In a room full of species who had been told, at various points in their histories, that patience was the same as giving up. His arm was writing. He did not look at it. He already knew what it said. The Oracy stopped. The veil surfaced. The Tuvhari filed. 3 things plain as that. Marin stood again after Dasren sat down. She had the floor for what the session record would later list as 4 minutes and 11 seconds. Felin timed it. She looked at the walls first, at the resin, at the 6,200 years of laminated compliance pressed into the architecture of the room, visible through the clear coating if you pressed your face close enough. "We are not here to destroy this institution," she said. "We are here because this institution is supposed to work. The charter says so. Page 1, line 1. Make it work, or we will help the species in these walls build one that does." She sat down. The session was supposed to be closed after the tribute response was logged. Asek filed the motion to close. The West Valley chair noted that a formally entered counterledger under Original Charter Article 1 required an audit response within 90 days before any session involving the filing parties could be procedurally closed. The motion to close failed. Then Oren of the West Valley stood up. Oren had not spoken in a session in 200 years. Felin had his last session appearance in the archive. A brief procedural question, 200 years ago, filed and answered and never followed up. Oren was old enough that his species records did not include a reliable birth date. He moved slowly. He asked for the floor with the careful posture of someone who has been waiting a specific amount of time for a specific moment. The chair granted it. Oren looked at Asek. "Under Conclave Charter Article 1, Section 1, he said. His voice was thin and very clear. "What is the purpose of this body?" The answer was written on page 1, line 1, the same page Marin had cited. It had been the same answer for 6,200 years. "To ensure that all obligations are honored. No counterdemand, no legal motion, no recorded answer from Asek at all." Because answering meant confirming that the largest outstanding obligation in conclave history was the one the Doranic assessor caste owed to 18 species, currently sitting in tribute bondage to it. Answering meant the charter required the conclave to pursue that obligation with the same force it had applied to every species on the lowered platform for 6 millennia. Asek did not answer. 3 Doranic junior assessors stood. They recused. They requested observer status. First fracture in 310 years, and it was quiet as a door closing in another room. Asek left the chamber without filing an outcome. Felin watched him go. He had 419 years of sessions behind him, 31 species assessed, a record that had never included a single entry without a resolution. He walked out with the same deliberate weight he always used, each step measured, each footfall exactly as loud as intended. But the jaw clicks were still. He passed through the north corridor exit, and the sound of his steps faded, and the hall was left with 900 delegates, and a session that could not be closed, and a counterledger that was already broadcasting to 12,000 worlds. Felin looked at the temperature readout on the north wall. It said 10.8 degrees. He looked at it for a long time. The system had held at 11 degrees for 6,200 years. He had never seen it display any other number. He could not tell if it was a sensor fault or a calibration drift or something that had simply, quietly changed. He wrote it in the session log. He did not note an explanation because he did not have one. The hall emptied slowly. Delegates filed out in clusters, quiet in the way that people are quiet when they are still processing something too large to talk about yet. The procedural staff packed their equipment. The West Valley chair sat for a long time at the session table before leaving. Felin came down from the balcony. Marin was on the obsidian floor, not on the lowered platform where the human delegation had sat for 14 years, but on the main floor level, the same height as everyone else. She had taken off her jacket. The napkin was in her hands. He sat down across from her. The floor was cold through his clothing. He did not say anything. Neither did she for a while. Then she began to name them. Not delegates, not politicians. Not the 7 people from Subchamber 14, or the 3.4 billion Oresi workers, or the Vale shipwrights who had kept 89 vessels hidden in the dark for 180 years. She named the ones underneath those, the ones the history would not automatically find. A woman in the Havari system, in the year of the 2087 labor purges, who had hidden 3 Oresi miners in the floor space beneath her storage unit for 11 days, and asked for nothing when they left. She had never told anyone. Her granddaughter had told Das Ren, 70 years later, not as a story about heroism, but as an explanation of why the family kept extra food stores even in good years. A Tuvhari junior archivist, 200 years ago, who had mislabeled a document scheduled for destruction, moved it one folder over, one category wrong, so that the automated purge system would skip it. The document was a complete record of Doranic exchange rate manipulation across a 40-year window. The archivist had never told anyone what they had done. The document had been sitting in the wrong folder, correctly preserved for 2 centuries. Marin's grandmother, in a kitchen in Talcahuano, who had kept a sourdough starter alive for 40 years and taught her granddaughter that bread was not food. It was evidence. Evidence that you had planned to be somewhere long enough to feed someone. The woman who hid the miners, the archivist who moved the file, the grandmother who kept the starter. 14 names in total. Felon wrote each one as she said them. He would file them tomorrow in the deep stacks, under a category he would create in the morning. He already knew what he would call it. She folded the napkin once more, the 214th time by his count, since she had first entered the ledger hall, and set it on the obsidian floor between herself and Osek's empty chair. Not as a surrender, as a record. The conclave would have its documents. Humanity would leave its scent. Felon's left arm, without his willing it, wrote one word in bioluminescent Tuvhari script across his skin. Ode. Neither of them moved to leave. The temperature readout on the north wall still said 10.8 degrees. The rosemary smell rose faintly from the napkin on the floor, thin and warm in the cold air, going nowhere in particular, filling the space the way smells do when there is no one left to notice them except the people who stayed.